Just going to be joined now by Gifford. He's a former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, obviously, lots of news related to Ukraine in the last few days, past that 1,000th day milestone earlier in the week. And then, of course, we saw that the US had given, well, Monday, we knew the US had given permission for Ukraine to use their ATACMS long-range missiles to go further into Russia to attack some of these key sort of military bases and indeed support lines. And then they were used. Last night, we understood that the UK's Storm Shadow missiles had been given permission to be used. No public statement about that from the US or the UK, but those were used. Reports today that an intercontinental ballistic missile had been fired back by Russia. Now, reports from America are now saying they think it was just a regular ballistic missile rather than intercontinental. But you've been actually out in Ukraine. You were fighting on the front line there, joining those forces, and all credit to you for that. Do these developments, do they worry you? Are you concerned about the escalation of this war?
No, I don't, actually. In fact, I'm quite the opposite. I think this is a big relief to a lot of Ukrainians who have been fighting, particularly in Kursk, with one arm tied behind their backs. Well, there's two things going on here, obviously. There's the recent permission, I think two things to talk about. The recent permission of the US to Ukraine to start firing back at Russian assets within Russia with their weaponry. I think that's a good thing. I think that could make a significant difference in the salient, in the Kursk salient in particular, which they're trying to keep hold of, hopefully to use in the future for a potential negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. And just recently, obviously, you saw the 10 Storm Shadows obviously being fired into that position in the Kursk region, which hopefully targeted the leadership of the Russian military in that area. So again, it's all about sort of decapitating the enemy, or the leadership of the enemy in that area, taking the fight to the Russians and supporting them. In regards to Russia firing that missile back at Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, that's more of a warning to the West than anything else. I genuinely believe that Russia won't do anything significant in response to this new announcement, primarily because he doesn't want to upset Donald Trump, who he knows he's coming in January.
Well, that's very interesting. You've often been concurring there with what Philip Ingram has been saying, with his analysis from the studio here. Why does he not want to upset Donald Trump? Do you think he's genuinely hopeful that Donald Trump will bring, Ukraine to the negotiating table by basically cutting off the supply of arms? Is that what everything is waiting for?
Well, I think Donald Trump, I was talking about this yesterday to some friends, Donald Trump is determined to get a deal. He wants to get a deal quickly. He's made promises and all the rest of it. The trouble is, I used to work in business for a very long time. Like all businessmen, like Donald Trump, like all capitalists, if you know someone's coming to the table and wants a deal and needs a deal, you're obviously not going to give them a particularly good deal. You're not going to cut them too much slack. And I strongly suspect that Putin is simply, he wants Donald Trump to come in. He thinks a deal can be done. The last thing he wants to do now is to upset the United States or its allies in any significant way. What are his options? I mean, recently there was a supposed attack on an undersea cable in this, I can't remember, was it the Baltic Sea? I forget now. Either way, if he did that to Britain, cuts an internet cable or a pipeline from the North Sea, it could cause some significant damage. And that's something that's always deterred Western policymakers over the last few years. But with Donald Trump coming in, I think the new analysis is that Putin really won't do anything before January. One thing I do want to say, to see how similar my point of view is with Philip Ingram's, is he was one of the most popular commentators amongst international volunteers in Ukraine. A lot of the guys in my battalion used to watch his updates every day, every week.
Well, that's stay well. He's got a big beaming look on his face there for that, so I'm sure he's glad to hear that, Macy. In terms of where Ukraine are, there's so much talk about what Donald Trump wants to do, what Biden wants to do, what Keir Starmer wants to do, what Putin wants to do. What do the Ukrainian people want? I saw a poll recently that suggested 50%, just over 50%, but, not a lot more of Ukrainians still, don't want to go for a negotiation, don't want to give away any territory. They want to fight. They've gone through so much already. It's their land, it's their democracy. They want to protect it. Their men have already died in that war, many innocent women and children too. And they've come this far. They want the Russians out of their territory. What is the feeling now? Is the feeling changing a lot now after with basically this war, just sort of entrenched warfare, so many losses, so much damage, the economy in tatters, towns and villages in tatters as well, that actually they would be willing to come to the negotiating table and cede some territory, not just Crimea, but cede some territory in the Donbass as well?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things. I think it's quite understandable that early on in the war, a lot of people were upset and devastated by the invasion, and there was a particular outpouring of anger against Russia. And it was actually a very unifying thing for the Ukrainian state. I mean, and also how proud they were at resisting in those early days. They utterly decimated the Russian army north of Kyiv, particularly. I have read the polls where some of the public opinion has softened in more recent years, or in recent months. All I can talk about really is my own view, and that is that there is so much injustice about the idea that Vladimir Putin could start this war, could cause widespread devastation, lose, by the way, hundreds of thousands of Russians as well, and still come away with something. I would very much like to see the West back Ukraine to the hilt, and actually remind ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where a nuclear power can invade a smaller country and get away with it, quite literally? Because it really makes the world so much more unstable. And if we don't want to send our own boys, British soldiers, around the world to defend other people, all the rest of it, then what we need is a stable world based on order, international law, and everything else. And that's something that we need to remember when we take the fight to Vladimir Putin.
Very interesting to talk to you. Mesa Gifford there, former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. Philip, we give a bit of shout out to you there from him and his compatriots on the from the trenches when they're out there. He's back in London now, Mesa, back safe and sound. But I mean, the death toll in Ukraine is extraordinary, and I would actually include sympathy for the Russians who are dying. These are conscripts. A lot of these men, they don't want to be there. These people fleeing Russia where they can to avoid being caught up, and they are basically cannon fodder. Just 1,600 a day are being lost on the front line to either death or to serious life-changing injury. It's just extraordinary. Putin cares not a jot about the Ukrainian people. He doesn't care about the Russian people either. We know that. But how does this end? Where does this end? Everyone's saying, "Oh, get to the negotiating table," but that would only embolden Vladimir Putin by saying to him, basically, look, take Crimea. We won't really do much. We'll just, sign a few motions in the United Nations and sort of, put our hands together and weep. And then you're going to invade the actual nation state and the mainland of Ukraine. And we'll send just enough weaponry to make it a bit difficult for you, but not enough to allow Ukraine to win. We could help Ukraine win this if we wanted to. Why don't we want to?
Well, I think a lot of domestic politics around the world, this year in particular, because there's been over 60 elections in different countries, has held up the decision-making.
Democracy gets in the way of good decision-making, it would seem.
It does. The difficulty is this will end with negotiation, full stop. There's no other way of the war ending.
Well, there is.
But you have to have the conditions set for negotiation. That negotiation is either, I've beaten you wholeheartedly, you've surrendered, and therefore we're going to negotiate how much you pay to rebuild the damage that you've caused, and how we're going to rule your country because it's ours now, or you get to a point where something less than that. But you have to have the conditions right. And as Mesa said, if you allow Putin to come in and to keep any of the territory that he has taken, whether it was in 2014 with Crimea or since his re-invasion 2.5, almost 3 years ago, then that's setting a precedent that is shocking internationally.
For you, you're saying not even an inch of Crimea?
No, I think you have to restore the international recognised boundaries. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically then giving Ukraine full control over Crimea. You could have it as a United Nations International Protectorate, for example, but you don't want Russian troops in it. That's where the compromise could come in. But if the territorial boundaries and borders are not restored, the message that sends to other dictators around the world and to Putin or Putin's successor in the future is terrible. And we're then into another Cold War scenario. We're talking of 6-7% of GDP minimum on defence, because there'll be an iron curtain across Europe and across other parts of the world.
Frankly, I think we should be spending that all this time anyway, but there we are.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are getting in touch saying, oh, you're warmongers. No, Putin's the war. This is about stopping a war. The idea that, I cannot understand. What do people think that we would do in that scenario, and why do we expect Ukraine to behave any differently? That's the bit I don't get.
The simplistic bit to put all those people are calling warmongers. If I broke into their house and I took the ground floor of their house and captured one of their children and one of their wives,
one of their wives,
and then negotiated and say, I'll give you half a child back, 2 of your wife's legs, and you can only have one of the rooms back because we're negotiating. Or do you want to punch me in the face and throw me out of the house and get the police to come in and take me away and lock me up? I'm sorry, those people accusing us of warmongers would want us physically removed from the house.
You for a tweet, so you do try to keep up, Philip. I'm going to go to the phone lines just very quickly because 0344 499 1000 is the number for you to call in on any of the topics we're talking about. The Ukraine, John Prescott, the 40% of Brits saying they're worse off since Labour was elected, the extraordinary charity involving Captain Tom's daughter and son-in-law, just the absolutely horrible abuse of people's trust and generosity, taking 1.5 million. I find absolutely extraordinary. But I just want to go to the phone lines because Carlos is on the line and he's in Essex. And Carlos, I just saw your message pop up on my screen and I wanted to come to you quickly. You think we're all being warmongers, don't you?
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised for you, Julia, because I've got to admit that 99.9% of the time, you are one of the most sanest people on the radio.
That's scary, really, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, let's be honest.
And there's so much history going on in Russia and why Putin decided to invade. Now, just like everyone else, I don't believe that he should have invaded Ukraine.
No.
It was insane. However, to try and believe that somehow he wasn't pushed in reference to doing those kind of things... He
wasn't pushed.
...is totally insane as well.
He wasn't pushed.
He was pushed.
No one pushed him to invade a sovereign nation state.
If you go back into history in reference to how both the Britain and...
I know all the history. I know all the history. Russia was also a guarantor of Ukraine remaining an independent nation state. Even if they joined EU or NATO, the only reason they wanted to join NATO was because they wanted to avoid Russian invasion. And weren't they right about that?
Right, so let's just obviously I'm not going to win that argument with you, so let's just go on to another part. Every single person that's been on the radio since I've been listening this morning with Mike is that every one of them have said how we need to go stronger and get rid of Russia and, bomb the crap out of it and everything else. Not one of those people, not one, are going to send their children to this war. Not one of those people are going to be killed. The innocent people in both Ukraine and Russia, not one of those people are going to be there, whether you're talking about the generals or whether you're talking about politicians or you're talking about people that call up. The fact is that innocent people are being killed. Now, the best thing that anyone could do is to have a conversation. Now, I'm aware that Putin tried to have a conversation when Boris decided to go to Ukraine when it first all happened, and he tried to have a conversation.
Putin doesn't do conversations. Putin only respects power and force. No one's talking about bombing Russia. We're not talking about the West bombing Russia. We're simply saying that, removing Russia from an allied sovereign nation state. Oh, no, we've lost the line. Oh, I'm gutted. Oh, gutted. Oh, look, call back in again, because I know we've spoken before. I know we'll speak again. Apologies, that's not me cutting him off. The line just went.